people talk about hooks all the time. So asking a question that's maybe shocking or will make somebody stop and look at the first 30 seconds. Doing product demos. We do a lot of ads that are video, like UGC primarily, of parents setting up children's play equipment, where I feel like we're finding a lot of success with that, and then putting overlay text, kind of TikTok style, but about not just what the product does, but what does it do for your child. So just value props over it.
If you start trying to do too much with one campaign, it's going to really overcorrect for what you're trying to accomplish. So let's say that you're trying to optimize everything towards the highest possible ROAS, right? Well, if you sell a whole array of products and one of them is $500 and one of them is $50, it might show the $500 product more just because it's a safer gamble that if someone buys it, it's going to hit the ROAS.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of PPC Town Hall. My name is Fred Valles. I'm your host. I'm also co-founder and CEO at Optmyzr. So today we're going to talk about e-commerce, Q4, social, all of the things that retailers will need to do to get ready to get the most out of Cyber Week that's coming up very soon. But for this episode, we're going to take more of a look at social as opposed to search, which we usually do. And to talk about social, I've got two of the best people in the world, social experts, former guests on the show who are coming back. So let's welcome them and let's get rolling with this episode of PPC Town Hall. Susan, Akvile, good to see you again. Thanks for coming back to PPC Town Hall.
Thanks for
Akvile,
having me.
How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Akvile, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about who you are for the people who haven't seen you before, what you're up to, and where are you calling us from today?
Sure. So I'm based in the Los Angeles area. I've been working in paid search and paid social for 15 years, but about 9 years ago, I amicably parted ways with the search world and focused only on paid social. And yeah, work mostly with e-commerce brands, some events, and some entertainment industry clients.
Great. And we didn't say your last name, Akvile Defazio, right? So if people want to look you up, go to LinkedIn. That's Akvile. Okay, Susan Wenograd, welcome back to the show as well. Tell us what you've been up to.
These days, after 20 years in marketing, I'm still doing a lot of paid media. So I'm head of paid media for a few places. I do some fractional CMO work as well. So I get to kind of take the paid media part and then also do the fun stuff like email marketing and content and all that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of blending a little bit more of the worlds these days, but still very, very heavily in paid ads.
Nice. Yeah. And I remembered, when I talked to you in the past, it was much more search focused.
Yeah.
But you've certainly gone down the social path a little bit more.
Yep.
And let's so maybe talk about that, right? So now that you've been doing social for a number of years, what is that like compared to search? What kind of growth do you see? How does it stack up? And what are some of the differences and challenges that you have compared to search?
Sure.
Or Susan, let's go with you first.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting is that paid search is starting to feel more like paid social in some ways. When I started in it, it was like 2014 was when I started doing Facebook ads, and it was all very, it was detailed, but you didn't have the same kind of insights that you did with Google ads. So being a search person that could see like every keyword, and you had all these levers and all these things you could do, you got in Facebook and it was kind of like, okay, pick your objective. You had control, but not nearly as much as you did in Google. And so that was an adjustment, but now it's been interesting because now Google's going more towards, the black boxy world in Google ads. And so I think because I've been in social for a while, I'm a little more comfortable with that happening. I mean, I'm not thrilled about it, but I'm also kind of like, it just feels very familiar. So I think for a lot of searchers, it doesn't, because they're watching their control go away, and having worked in both platforms.
Let's talk on that for a second. So, I think that's a really interesting topic, and Akvile, I'd love to hear from you. But so like in search, we're all fighting this change that Google's making towards more automated bidding, more black box, performance max campaigns, and it's like this struggle, right? But now in social, like you're saying, Susan, social started in a whole different era when automation was better, and so Facebook has never had those controls, and yet people deal with it, and they still seem to be quite successful with it. right? So what is it we're missing in search? And Akvile, I'd love to hear from you, but like, how do we make that transition? And should we stop whining? Or are we really going to miss out on something?
I think we all have a certain degree of love-hate with the platforms that we work on. I feel like paid social is going in that direction. There's a lot more automation. Going broader is getting more personalized, which seems ridiculous to say it that way, but it works better these days as you kind of consolidate everything together. There are less levers.
Broader, but more personalized.
Broader in terms of targeting, but more personalized in terms of how the AI just serves ads much more effectively in the last year compared to the few years prior to that, after iOS 14, that whole thing happened. But in the last year, there's been a significant change, at least from what we've seen in the accounts that we work on, that we're having to go broader to get better results, which seems like the adverse of what we've done in the decade before that.
That's really interesting. And I know we wanted to talk about campaign structures. So it might be a good segue here, right? So you're saying you have to go broader to take full advantage of the machine learning capabilities, which then give you more personalized ads. And I'm assuming that you're also saying more personalized ads probably have better performance? Not always.
Testing, I think you have to diversify in terms of what you're testing still, because a lot of people buy the same product or get the same service, but for different reasons, right? So I think figuring out what messaging works best within a campaign, but targeting broader, but then the system knows who to serve ads to that are more likely to accomplish your objective, like purchasing, for instance.
So in social, and Susan, let's go to you, but in social, Advantage Plus campaigns, I believe you can have up to 8 for the same product or something. Like, so do you typically take full advantage of that full 8, or when you talk about like going broad and kind of like giving more leeway to the machine, does that mean one works better than many?
So I think the challenge that I've always had with Facebook is like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So if you start trying to do too much with one campaign, it's going to really like overcorrect for what you're trying to accomplish. So like, let's say that you are, you're trying to optimize everything towards the highest possible ROAS, right? Well, if you sell a whole array of products and one of them is $500 and one of them is $50, it might show the $500 product more just because it's a safer gamble that if someone buys it, it's going to hit the ROAS. So we've seen kind of this disparity when we try and do too much with one campaign that way, because you're not going to learn what you think you're learning, because it's really trying to optimize towards whatever your overall goal is. So I try and find that happy balance. And Google's actually like this too at this point, where you need to try and make things broad enough that Facebook will get enough data to make decisions. But you can't make it give it so many options that it just ends up kind of watering everything down. And it's not an exact science by any stretch of the imagination. But it's kind of the same issue we see with Google, where it's like, if it's the chicken and the egg problem, you're like, you need it to get a lot of purchases, but if it's, achieving that by just over indexing on one certain type of purchaser or user, there's still going to be this, no matter how broad you target, it's going to keep leaning into that one area if you go super broad. So there's a balance for sure.
Right. Akvile, what are your thoughts on structure?
Simplified structure, but we're still doing things that some people are very adamant about not doing anymore. We still do some interest targeting.
I do too.
We still do retargeting. And like, as long as it works, as long as I don't start seeing a dip in performance, I'll keep running it. I mean, we have had one retargeting ad for a client running since September 2020, and it's still our top performing ad. So I'm like, I'm going to keep running it until I can't anymore, or I shouldn't.
Yeah. I had a top of funnel ad that I ran for 2.5 years, and it didn't matter what I put up against it. It always won. I could not beat it.
That's super fascinating, because I thought one of the whole differences between search and social was that in search, you can have that evergreen ad that just continues to perform. I had one, I think, for a decade. It was doing great. And then eventually I had to change it because the ad format simply went away. And on social, the whole take is that people start tuning out if it's the same ad, the same creative, so you have to keep it fresh. But do you think what you're describing here is an element of like, there's always a new audience that's seeing this ad, so there's a continuous influx that comes from that? Or can you like not vary the ads that much with the same audience and still at some point it'll resonate and they'll click and they'll convert?
A little bit of both. The frequency is still low. They have a lot of website traffic. We're advertising a lot of channels for them. So I feel like there's a continuous influx of just feeding their funnel. And I'm sure people are still seeing their ads numerous times because we're not able to exclude as much anymore these days, but it's still performing well. So
I think the other thing is too, especially if it's an ad that gets a lot of attention and a lot of interaction, you automatically see like as more interactions happen, like it starts to do better and better because A, your costs start going down because people are interacting with it. But B, users are just more likely to stop and look at it because if there's 900 comments on something, you want to see what's going on. It's like, oh, is that a train wreck or do people love the product, right? So everybody has to stop and look. So there's kind of like the thumb stop piece of it too, where the longer that it's running, the more likely it is to start building up that social proof.
Yeah.
And that social proof, how do you fuel that?
Akvile, do you want to take that? Or
no, go ahead.
So
take a breath first.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, you know, I used to do a lot of like take one ad ID and simultaneously run it as an engagement campaign and as a purchase campaign so that it had one ID that was accruing both of the objectives. I don't find that works as well anymore. And there's all kinds of like hinky stuff where it won't run the same ad ID. It just creates a new one. So that's kind of where I think having the right creative is becoming more and more important because everybody does just tune it out unless it's something really good. So I feel like the brands, you know, that I work with and have worked with that do well are the ones that really get their audience and they deliberately create stuff that they know will get a reaction of some kind. So they go into their creative with that in mind, where it's like, we're not necessarily going to talk about the product. We want to get them to react somehow. And that's like the goal of the creative beyond just even selling anything. So they go in with that as like what they're focusing on, knowing that that's going to have the outcome that they want eventually.
It's a good point. I mean, if I think about myself and I see an ad on Instagram and it's got like 4 reactions, I'm like, yeah, the product's probably not that good.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the star reviews and the count of how many reviews are being substituted by that.
Yeah. Yeah. The more that you can kind of tell your audience, like, we are one of you, the more that they're going to interact because it's like they see something they identify with. But the other thing that we see is people will tag friends, coworkers. Like if it's something that they're just like, oh my gosh, this is you, or this is us, or whatever. The more you can produce creative like that, the easier it is to kind of get those automatic social proof things that just happen because it's a community. So you have to capitalize on the community piece.
And so that's a huge difference from search, right? In search, It's all about being relevant and answering as directly as possible that consumer intent.
Yep.
Right here, it sounds like, how do we have something that builds engagement, that builds community? So, so what are some of the little tricks that people, or that, you know, both of you use to make that happen? What resonates in ads?
Did you want to answer? I feel it.
Sure. You know, people talk about hooks all the time. So asking a question that's maybe shocking or will make somebody stop and look at the first 3 seconds. Doing product demos. We do a lot of ads that are video, like UGC primarily, of parents setting up children's play equipment, where I feel like we're finding a lot of success with that. And then putting overlay text, kind of TikTok style, but about not just what the product does, but what does it do for your child? So just value props over it.
So it almost doesn't sound like an ad. So is this like organic content that is then trying to?
Yes. So we'll run it as ads, but we found more success, kind of what we're talking about the last subject, where we'll have the client post it on their organic channels and then we'll boost it. And then we can take that engagement and move it around to different campaigns without resetting it. And that's worked out really well. But things that are less refined and more natural in content and visual content seem to be performing a lot better than things that are a bit more polished these days.
Agreed. I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Susan. I'd love to hear from you.
I was going to say the other thing that works well is inside jokes. So like things that no one would get unless they were that person, right? So it's like no matter what kind of product it is, and this works in B2B or e-com, but it's also really helpful because you are having to target broadly. The more that you can kind of make that creative speak very specifically and get a reaction, the better off it tends to do with the optimization faster. So I frequently find that like a sense of humor actually just goes leaps and bounds ahead of most ads. And the more that you can make it like someone would just stare at me like, I don't get it, that's actually good, because if they're not your person, you don't want them to get it. So it's like, don't post, general cat memes that everyone will like. It's like, post the stuff that only your target would acknowledge and laugh at and respond to.
Yeah, if you know, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal about Loro Piana, the brand which has never put logos on their clothes, and they're very expensive. I didn't realize how expensive they were. I looked it up, and I think a hat was around, was it $3,000?
Oh my God.
What's it made of?
I mean,
yeah, exactly.
I was gonna say I like my brain, but like it's a really expensive thing to stick on it.
Yeah. Their whole point was like, it's they don't have to put the logo on, and that's what makes it appealing, is that if you know that that's that brand, then you're part of that exclusive club of people who can afford it.
Wow.
And you might aspire to be like them.
Oh.
But then so part of the angle of the story was that they have started being a little bit more forward with the logo, like a black on black sort of a thing. And maybe, I don't know, that it's a consumer shift where, yeah. Anyway, I don't know what the point is.
They have to send the signal. Like, they have to send some signal that they have a $3,000 hat. Otherwise people are like, "Where'd you get that hat, Target?" Like, they're not gonna. I wouldn't know. I'd offend somebody.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, let me shift topics here to Gen AI, and I know it wasn't something we sort of told you we were going to talk about. But speaking of ads, right? I mean, I imagine you must be using some sort of Gen AI to help you with the humor, the inside jokes, the imagery. Tell me about what you've tried and what's been working. And Susan, let's start with you.
So I've started to get good at Midjourney. And it's not that we necessarily end up using what's created, but it's helped a lot with like inspiration for photo shoots and things like that. And just kind of like theming for campaigns. And I can't draw. I cannot design a damn thing. So I love that I can go and be like, make me this. And it's like, it still does weird stuff where like, they still don't have hands right. There'll be like an arm growing out of a hand. Like it's very confused by limbs still. And it struggles to understand we have 5 fingers. That's the other thing it's not good at. So there's weird things like that, but it's been really helpful to like communicate like tone or, campaign ideas or, those sorts of things. And then I love Gen AI for just helping me when I feel like I'm stuck on ad copy. And I do the same thing for search too, because especially, I mean, I feel like sometimes more so with search, because how many headlines can you write about like whatever it is that the product is? It's like you run out of ideas. And I don't find Google's suggestions to be that great. So I have become a fan of like, give me 5 different ways to say this thing. Or if I feel like, you fall in the trap, and this is true even when you're marketing someone else's product, when you do it for long enough, you start feeling like you're just saying the same thing over and over. And you're like, I sound like a product marketer. I'm not really thinking like the consumer. It actually gets harder and harder to think like the consumer. Mm-hmm. So I like it for that, to kind of be like, these are the benefits of this thing. How would I sell this in a really funny way? And it's not that I necessarily use what it comes up with, but it really helps me kicks my butt back into the mindset of being the person that's going to buy the thing. I just find that it helps me shift the mindset. If I feel like I'm too close to the product and I'm not having an easy time figuring out like the benefits.
What a lot of people talk about, where it's like an intern who comes in who's not that familiar with your company, and they can have a conversation that leads you down the path of, that's as a typical consumer.
It's like someone to brainstorm with. You know what I mean?
Hey, a fun one that you might enjoy based on what you just said. So you're not very good at drawing. There's a system called Alpaca ML. And it's a plugin for Photoshop. And one of its capabilities is to take a doodle. And so you can literally sketch like stick figures on a napkin. You take a photo of it, you give that to it. And then you're like, now turn this into a photorealistic, like in the style of Pixar or whatever. And it does a fairly decent job.
Wow,
so,
that's creepy.
That's a fun one.
That's so cool though. I love that. It's so helpful for people like me that like I have a very creative mind, but it's like I can't create what I'm thinking of. Like I might have this really great scene in my head. I can't translate it into anything. So I'm like, it's actually, things like Midjourney or Dolly, they've been a godsend for people that are like, I had this thing in my head, but I was not gifted the ability to translate it through my hands. So it's been nice to have.
Nice. Akvile, how about you?
Oh, yes. With ad copy as well. It saved me a lot of time. I usually use Jasper. I've also been playing with copy.ai, and that's really good as well. Imagery, playing with Midjourney, not putting anything in production yet because hands. I know that my Photoshop skills are a little lacking these days, so I haven't been refining it that way. But Canva also has a new ChatGPT Plus account plugin, so I've been playing with that. That's really great to just make it more efficient to what I want to make in Canva for quick things. And then my favorite one, actually, before I move on to that one, Meta always started rolling out in the ad level different AI text variations. But what's interesting is that we've been conditioned to not say click next or start. It's starting to tell me in the suggestions to add click blah, blah, blah below. And I'm like, well, it's supposed to be intuitive to know to click the ad, right? We've been conditioned to not include that in ad copy. And it's also adding hashtags
too. It'll give things where it wants me to use the word you, and Facebook does not like when you say you in your ad copy. So it's it's a good point.
I think they rolled it out a little bit too soon, but I was going to say my favorite one, and I love that you're here, Susan, because you taught me how to do. I remember back in the day, you're the one that taught me how to do VLOOKUPs and pivot tables. You were one of my early mentors on this, but I've taken all that knowledge and now I'm using rose.com, which is really great. Have you used that yet?
Not yet.
Like
no.
Excel
Apparently I have to.
But it has a lot of the same capabilities of Excel, but you can also use its AI to summarize the data for you. You can even ask it like, which ads got a 3x return or higher, and it'll just tell you. So it's saving me a lot of time with reporting and analysis.
Good tip.
Nice. Yeah, and a couple of things I picked up in there. So it sounds like you don't use the word you, don't use the words click here. So custom instructions from ChatGPT, in case anyone listening hasn't used that. That's a great way to just not have to say it every time when you ask for new headlines. Just put it in. It's a one-time thing. Every next set of headlines, it'll keep that into factor that in. And then I'm also hearing like picking the right model to do the work for you. So you're using Jasper. And one of the premises of Jasper is that it basically sits as a middle layer on top of the different large language models. And it knows which one is better for writing a resume, and which one's better for writing ad text, etc. Right. So I think that's a skill that all of us, as we explore these different models, that's great. And then I think the customization of the model, that's something I've been playing with. So how do you basically ingest a core truth of your business? So like what's the brand guidelines? How do we like to talk about ourselves? How do you ingest that so that the large language model becomes a little bit more grounded in the way that you like to do business? And in fact, Alpaca, that image model, you can train it based on your images. So you can just give it like 100 sample images from your website, and then it starts to create images in that same style. So it's very nice.
That's crazy. I could save a lot of money on product photography.
Exactly. Well, we'll put the photographers out of business, and then we'll be out of business next.
I know.
How do you both think about the progression of your careers with Gen AI doing so many of the creative things that honestly 1 to 2 years ago, like I didn't think we were going to be here.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly it happened. Like I feel like we've been talking about it for years, and so then you think it's going to take that long to get there, and it's like, no, we talked about it for 10 years and it happened in 1.5.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the things that frustrate us today, like by the time this episode actually airs in like 1 or 2 weeks, it's probably like, oh,
they're going to fix the hands. They'll fix the hands in Midjourney by the time this airs.
Hey, has anyone tried just like putting in the prompt, like, please give every person 5 fingers?
No, I should. I feel like it would give them 5, but then it would put them in their forehead or something. There's been so many times where it's like it's made everything in the picture is beautiful. It's just the hand is completely jacked up, and I'm like, damn! I'm like, the rest of this is so good.
Hopefully, you're selling blankets and you can just have them covered up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, seriously. Put it in Canva, just put a white box over it.
Nice. Okay, well, what else is interesting? So Q4, right? And this is the biggest time of the year for selling stuff online.
Yeah.
What's the take on social? So on search, Microsoft is talking about how the combination of the display network plus search boosts conversions like 11x, the likelihood of conversion. What are you both doing on social?
I guess on the social side, I mean, I think what's going to be interesting this year is it's just kind of a strange time where it's like, are we going to be in a recession? Are we not? There's inflation. So I've sensed a lot of retailers wanting to start their deals a lot earlier. So I'm very curious to see, like, we've started to see that last year because it was kind of the same thing where it was like, are we going to be in a recession? Are we not? Like, there's just been this weird teetering for a while. So I'm interested to see for me this year, how early do people decide to start? Because last year I had, customers like they were starting their stuff on November 1 and they're like, we're not doing anything different for Black Friday. We're just going to run it all the way through. So I'm very curious to see if that's kind of.
So, I mean, Prime Day or Prime Big Deals Day, which I think is a sub flavor of Prime Day. So that's already happened now. So that seems to have been Amazon's reaction to, hey, well, we're not quite sure, so let's do some deals. But then as a consumer, the deals weren't quite as good as like the actual Prime Day.
Yeah.
So I guess they were testing the waters.
I was going to say, I think it was kind of a test for them to see, like, how much did people go for it or how much did they hold off? I mean, and it's because they still have time. They can adjust, right? It's like they've already put in, I mean, the buyers have already bought whatever they're going to do, but it's like from a pricing standpoint, they can still play with those models up until, way back in the day when I worked at a retailer, we were changing the prices the night before. So there's still a lot that could happen between now and then. But I think that's going to be an interesting thing to see this year is how early do they start? Because they're going to do the cash grab early. And it's always tied into when am I going to see the first Christmas themed commercial? Haven't seen it yet, but usually sometime towards the end of October, you see the first one.
Well, we need to let Halloween play out first, right? Like we can't.
We didn't last year. I saw my first Christmas commercial in October. I was like, wow, really?
Yeah, I mean, like an interesting point too. Again, Microsoft study that they just put out, but the clicks that you get in October, 67% of your conversions in November will have started with a click in October, and 50% of conversions that happen in December will have started with some click event in October. So kind of making the point that the shopping behavior is there and people are looking for stuff and still holding off for that better deal. But putting them on your remarketing lists now, putting them in your audiences now, like that's going to help you down the line, right? So make sure your budgets are dialed up. The other interesting thing
to capture emails too is something that a lot of places don't. I mean, they kind of treat it as business as usual. You know what I mean? They're like, oh yeah, we do email, but I'm like, but focus on it now, right? Because those are less people you're going to have to pay for to try and reach when the holidays hit. So I always try and encourage retailers, like if they're running ads, it's like, make sure you're also tracking how many of those people that came through ads sign up for emails so that you kind of know what's the eventual ROI if they don't buy today, but they signed up and they buy during the holiday.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, we're doing something like that for a few of our clients. We launched like a week ago saying, sign up for our email list to be the first to know when our biggest sale of the year drops. So we're just trying to feed the email funnel, drive more sales that way before CPMs go up. And then the rest of them, we are launching November 1st with a lot of our sales. And then the week of Black Friday, we're going to bump it up by another 5% site-wide, no promo, just to make it really easy to shop.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else that we haven't covered? I think we're going to finish up here soon, but want to give you both a chance to talk about some other thing that you think is exciting or that people are missing out on. And of course, plug where people can find you. And if they want to work with you, it is not too late at this point. If you need help, if everything...
Never too late. Never too late.
So Susan, let's start.
I think, I don't know, you were saying before about like watching the difference between Gen AI and all of this stuff. And it was really funny because I'm doing some head of paid media kind of strategic advising. And one of the guys on the team, it's become this running joke that I call myself the paid search fossil. Because there's just like all of this stuff at this point that I remember from 2007. But it's wild, like when you look back at all the things we either used to be able to do or we had to do that we don't really have to do anymore. I was thinking that the other day. I was like where I spend my time, whether it's in paid social or paid search, has changed so much. Like in Facebook, it was, we used to have, and Akvile remember this, we used to have like a bazillion campaigns. Like we had to be so specific. And now it's weird because you go and you're like, there's not really much for me to optimize. Like you really can spend more time being creative.
I remember a presentation you gave in Italy, and I think you gave it in Malta, but I saw it in Italy, and it was basically about how to have consistent naming conventions so
Yes.
that you can keep track of all the many, many campaigns that you had to run.
Yep. Not anymore.
So do that anymore, nice.
Now it's
You
a
get to
lot
do
simpler.
actual marketing now, not just like spreadsheet
Well,
formula.
I think that's
Cool.
part of the thing is it's like when I see people get really upset about it. I mean, I did a keynote about this in June where I was basically look, these changes are not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, it's like I pulled and I was like, do you remember when we had to go through, like, I still remember in paid search we would export all of the bid data and the CPA data from editor, and we'd have to make a formula in the Excel sheet to adjust all the bids and then re-upload the damn thing. And I'm like, I don't know if you liked doing that. I did not. Like, I'm okay not having to do those things. Like, there's a lot of things I don't have to do anymore that I'm really happy about because
And
I'd
for
rather
those people
spend.
that love doing that, Optmyzr has a built-in capability. Run any
See,
formula, it's in and out, it's easy.
there you go. But it's like so to me it's like I like being able to spend more time being a marketer, and I feel like a lot of the things that are changing are allowing us to do that. Is it perfect? God no, but I'm okay that they're taking steps in that direction. I'd rather spend my time on stuff that is meaningful for humans to have an impact on.
Well, and that's another interesting point that I've sort of seen in the context of Gen AI, which relates to what you just said, in that we're all perfectionists, right? And we're like, well, we could probably get like 3% more performance out of this, or we could do that. But how many hours do you have to put in to achieve that, right? And it's the same with like, okay, well, Gen AI, it doesn't write quite as well as I do. It gives me ideas faster, but ultimately I'm always massaging the text that comes out and I have to make it my own. But is that really necessary? Because we think about it from our perspective, but like someone here was saying too before, like think about the consumer, right? It's not our perspective as writers. It's what is the reader want? What is good enough for them? Where do they get value? Yeah. And so not being so stuck to like that level of perfection that we desire.
Yeah.
But be good enough and like actually have time at the end of the day to go home to your families and play with your dog.
I had a boss that once told me a 90% is still an A, and I'm like, that's damn true. It's true.
All right, and Susan, remind folks if they want to get a hold of you.
Yeah.
What's the best way to find you?
Yeah, sure. You can just drop me an email, susan@susanwenograd.com. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I have a podcast that drops every day with an amazing content marketer that we have a blast doing. So if you want to keep listening to two people gab about marketing, you can do it there.
Fantastic. Akvile, anything that you think we should be talking about before we wrap up?
Get everything lined up for Black Friday, holidays, any sort of sales. Set it up, schedule it, get it to the review process. We've seen in prior years where, we do launch last minute where some assets come in and then, there's a bug that happens or the review process is prolonged and then you might not launch on time. So I know it's kind of rudimentary, but do that, set it up, let yourself breathe a little easier that weekend. And then you can find me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it these days, at Akvile Defazio. You can go to advertise.com. That's probably a little bit easier with my name being a bit more complex.
Advertise. Well, advertise, probably a K, not a D, right?
Correct. It's like advertise, but also my name. So so advertised as advertising.
I was stressed out in August, I think, because I was like, oh my God, Christmas is literally tomorrow.
I know.
And then I counted, I was like, no, it's actually 6 months away. We're right in the middle of, but I was already stressed because I hadn't been able to tell my Optmyzr customers, like, here's the strategy, here's what we expect, because Bing didn't have their data, Google didn't have their data.
Yeah.
And now we're in Q4. Like we said,
almost here.
Yeah. Good. Well, hey, it's been fun talking to both of you again. To everyone viewing, thanks for watching us. If you want to see more of these episodes, hit the subscribe button at the bottom right there. And of course, if you need help with tools, you can find us at optmyzr.com. We got a 2-week free trial, full featured, so check it out. And we'll be back with another episode soon. Thank you both for being here. And thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.